decision to withdraw funds has obviously had a significant impact on the organisation's activities.
The United States lowers its support to UNESCO as Palestinians raise the flag, and winning a war of a different kind as levels of malaria infections in Africa fall to an all-time low.
It's good news, and in a world starved for good news, this is a good news report. We still have a long way to go.
This is The World with Tim Stackpool.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for the program again this week. The president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, on Tuesday raised the Palestinian flag at the headquarters of UNESCO in Paris. This is the first time its flag has been raised over a UN body. Palestine was admitted into UNESCO as a full member in October this year, despite protests from certain states, including Israel and the United States, with the latter consequently withdrawing substantial funding to the agency. Australia's Susan Williams is UNESCO's media chief in Paris, and she spoke to Maha Fayek about what this means for the Palestinians and the organisation.
The feeling was one of elation in the part of the audience. All of the Arab delegates were there, and there were a number of guests invited by the Palestinians. So it was a very sympathetic crowd in the main auditorium at UNESCO. And when President Abbas took the floor, there was a considerable applause. So it was a very celebratory moment, a very moving moment, as President Abbas said. And the crowd was very warmly welcoming Palestine to UNESCO.
What does this concretely mean to UNESCO?
It means that as a full member, Palestine can ratify all of UNESCO's conventions, for example, the World Heritage Convention, and take part in all of UNESCO's activities and programs in its various areas of competence: education, science, culture, communication.
The withdrawing of US dues and other financial contributions, how this will impact on UNESCO and on UNESCO programs throughout the world and in Palestine in particular?
The US contributes 22% of UNESCO's regular budget. The decision to withdraw funds for 2012-2013 and not to pay the 2011 dues has obviously had a significant impact on the organisation's activities. Everything is on go slow at the moment. The major review is undertaken to see where we can make savings. There are meetings being delayed. There are publications being cut. We're looking at every possible way that we can make savings in all of our activities. In Palestine, it's a little too early to tell. We're doing a lot of work in Palestine. There are a lot of projects underway on the ground. A lot of the work in Palestine is undertaken with what we call extra budgetary funds, voluntary funds, if you like, and those are not in danger at all at the moment. But obviously, we are looking very carefully at how we spend our money. The Director General of UNESCO made an appeal to our member states, to UNESCO's, the various organisations, groups, communities that UNESCO works with, to contribute to the organisation. And there have already been a number of donations that have come in, notably from Indonesia, which gave $10 million, Gabon, which gave $2 million, and Timor-Leste, which has donated $1.5 million.
UNESCO's Sue Williams ending that report from Paris by Maha Fayek. To Africa now, where steady progress is being made in fighting malaria. In that continent alone, malaria deaths have declined considerably, down by 33% in the past decade. This success is largely due to life-saving interventions such as insecticide-treated mosquito nets, indoor spraying, and effective and successful medication. Dr. Robert Newman of the World Health Organization spoke to Jerry Adams about what is being done to contain the deadly mosquito.
It's good news, and in a world starved for good news, this is a good news report. We still have a long way to go, and I don't want people to become overconfident from this report. However, it does show that these interventions do work, and that what stands between us and the global goals that have been set for malaria really is a question of adequate resources to scale up these proven interventions.
Can you talk about drug resistance? What is it and why does it happen?
Malaria is entirely preventable and treatable illness, but to treat malaria, you need to diagnose it with a diagnostic test and treat it with a medicine called an antimalarial medicine. And our most effective medicine is actually a combination of two types of medicines, and they're called ACTs, or artemisinin-based combination therapies. And these, over the past decade, have really improved treatment for people with malaria and have saved countless numbers of lives. Unfortunately, resistance to one of the components of these ACTs, the artemisinin component, which is the very powerful part that kills the parasites very quickly, has emerged on the border between Cambodia and Thailand several years ago. And WHO, working with a number of partners, including the governments of Cambodia and Thailand, with the Gates Foundation, with USAID, with Malaria Consortium and other partners, has been working to support the activities to contain this problem in the region where it's identified. On the other hand, this doesn't appear to be spreading very rapidly, and we have no evidence of this resistance to the artemisinins emerging in Africa to date.
So there are other ways that have been used to fight malaria, and one of them is mosquito-resistant insecticides. What's the latest on that?
The best way to prevent malaria, or to defeat malaria, is to prevent it in the first place. And so one of the ways that we do that is through vector control. So malaria is transmitted by mosquitoes, and so we can prevent mosquitoes from biting people and also kill mosquitoes through long-lasting insecticide-treated mosquito nets and by spraying the inside of houses. And that helps break the cycle of transmission and prevent people from getting malaria.
I guess it's even harder to eliminate the mosquito totally.
It is. Right now, many countries are in the phase of controlling malaria. When a country gets to the point of having no more malaria cases that are transmitted within its borders, in other words, you could still get a traveler coming back with malaria, but no malaria is transmitted within the country by local mosquitoes, that country has eliminated malaria and is certified by WHO as being malaria-free. And the ultimate goal, the global goal, which I think will take 40 years or more to achieve, is to eradicate malaria completely from the face of the earth. And that will take new tools to get us there.
And there's also been talk about a malaria vaccine. Is that possible in our lifetime?
In October of this year, we heard the preliminary results of a large phase 3 trial that's being conducted in 11 different sites in 7 different countries in Africa, enrolling more than 15,000 children. And those preliminary results confirmed the data that had been seen in previous trials, showing that this vaccine seems to prevent about 55% of clinical malaria in the first year after it's administered. And those are very encouraging results. We've never had a malaria vaccine get this far in development, and so people are excited.
This is The World with Tim Stackpool.
Last week on the program, we reported on how women are particularly affected when stricken with poverty. This week, it's reported that women are also most at risk from climate disasters. From 1999 to 2008, floods affected almost 1 billion people in Asia, 28 million in the Americas, 22 million in Africa, and 4 million in Europe. I asked the UN's Jim Sniffen why women are disproportionately affected.
All vulnerable segments of society, including women and children, are disproportionately affected by climate change because they lack, in many cases, options to adapt to it, to react to it, to its impacts. They're in many ways locked into the physical setting where the impacts are occurring, or they don't have the financial or the social wherewithal to adapt and move on to other options, both physically and economically.
I read in your report that women, particularly in mountainous areas in developing nations, face further challenges to their livelihood and health during climate disasters. Why particularly mountain ranges?
Well, the report uses case studies, particularly from the Himalayas, because one of the collaborating centers that we work with is based in Nepal, and they've been doing a lot of work on climate change in the region. But this report focuses on the gender aspects of impact and hopefully the responses to it. But women, particularly those working in agriculture, are disproportionately affected in that particular region or mountains in general, because there are a high percentage of subsistence farmers are handled by women to meet day-to-day needs. It's also because the women are the energy providers by wood gathering, not just adult women, but younger women, girls. They tend to be much more involved in that economic sector where, again, they don't have much room for maneuver if they are impacted by heavy rains, drought, the extremes of water management, both too much and too little.
There's quite a focus on Nepal in your report, and human trafficking is raised, and it does indicate an increase in human trafficking as well, correlating, I guess, the best way to describe it, with climate disasters.
One of the organizations that contributed to this report was Interpol. And what they have found in general with regard to social disruption, disasters of any kind, is that there is a spike in the numbers and percentage of trafficking cases. And they are using anecdotal information so far to surmise that natural disaster disruptions that may be caused by changes in climate and rainfall patterns, floods and so forth, have contributed to a spike in that region in trafficking, not just of women, but trafficking in general, children as well.
That's Jim Sniffen with the UN's Environment Programme. Across to India now, and culturally, thousands of women in that country are often shunned from society when their husbands die. Excluded and marginalised, they face a life of poverty and injustice. Some even live on the streets merely begging for a bite. But one woman, a widow herself, is working to change their lives. Before we hear this report by Pat Duffy, just a warning that the descriptions in this story might be disturbing to some listeners.
On the banks of the Ganges River, women pray to the gods in the name of good health and prosperity for their husbands. Being a widow here is like a death sentence. In some parts of India, widows commit sati, throwing themselves on their husband's funeral pyre in an act of self-immolation. Dr. Mohini Giri is a human rights activist. She labored for 4 decades, fighting for these invisible, forgotten women.
There was one widow who was lying dead on the streets. And the vultures were coming and eating her flesh, dogs were coming there. And the people were walking past it and nobody was caring even to pick up the dead body. And that really shook me absolutely.
In 1829, sati was banned by the British. But even though it was banned, it still happens in some areas. A temple was even built in the name of one such woman. Priest Ajay Tiwari guards the temple around the clock.
People keep coming from far and near to visit the temple every day to get a glimpse.
While women committing sati are considered goddesses, living widows face widespread discrimination, says Dr. Giri. More than 16,000 of them settle in Vrindavan, secluded and obedient to customs relegated for widows. They wear white, cut their hair short, and eat only once a day. Many stay alive on bits of food and a few daily rupees they may get from singing. And those who can no longer sing resort to begging in the streets, living one day at a time. Haunted by the image of the dead body in the street and determined to help widows, Dr. Giri traveled the world raising funds. In 2008, she built an ashram, or shelter for widows.
What am I trying to achieve? To give dignity in death to these women, to give them a healthier life. Women are now totally empowered.
The ashram, also located in Vrindavan, is home to some 500 widows, including Kamla, widowed for 40 years.
It looks nice. We get to eat and drink. Everybody lives together here.
And to raise awareness of the plight of widows worldwide, Dr. Giri and others appealed to the United Nations for 10 years. In 2010, the UN declared 23rd June as the International Day for Widows.
For the whole world, so that this lot of widows who have been neglected so far can also come into some kind of a focus.
But Dr. Giri says there's still one thing she must do.
Change the mindset of man that they should not look down upon these widows.
For now, Kamla is content on settling for inner peace and spending her final days at Dr. Giri's ashram.
When I get sick and my hands and feet stop working, I will live and die here.
Pat Duffy with that special report. Developing countries themselves are currently being urged to strengthen their cooperation in order to tackle hunger and ensure food security. Almost 925 million people in some of the poorest countries around the world are not getting enough food. Those countries are being advised that through collaboration, they can ensure more of their respective population can remain fed. Daniel Dickinson has the story.
Rice is a staple food in dozens of countries around the world, but not everyone is getting enough, especially in Africa. But now efforts are being made to ensure that countries like Nigeria, Sierra Leone and Mali are getting the right technological support to grow more rice. Professor Fuming Liao is from the China National Hybrid Rice Research and Development Center, an organization which is helping to boost rice yields in West Africa.
Hybrid rice technology actually is one of the most important contents in the South-South cooperation in China. And as you know, we have mainly three approaches to transfer this technology to the developing countries.
Discussions on how to transfer that technology have been taking place at the UN-backed South-South Development Expo in Rome. Developing countries like China are now putting more financial and technical muscle behind initiatives to help improve food security. Professor Fuming Liao again.
We demonstrate this technology in those countries and let them know how the hybrid performed, how high yield you can achieve. And through this way, also we can let them know the technology, what to do, and learning by doing.
While rice growing know-how is being exported from Asia to Africa, Asian countries are also supporting each other. The Philippines-based Asian Farmers Association includes 8 Asian countries and represents 10 million farmers. It promotes sustainable rural development to address the roots of rural poverty. According to Esther Pinunia, the association's Secretary-General, South-South cooperation means more than just the transferring of skills. She says women must play a key role.
Organizing women farmers should be key, and giving them a voice, affirmative action from local up to the national, up to international should be there. And women's access to markets, women's access to credit and technology should be given. But foremost, give a space for women, for them to organize themselves and for them to articulate their positions.
The annual South-South Development Expo ends on Friday. It's hoped that experts, farmers and policymakers will return home with new ideas on how to feed the 925 million people who are not getting enough to eat. Daniel Dickinson, United Nations.
To another struggle now, that of a developed nation still reeling after disaster. The legacy and aftermath of the earthquake and tsunami that devastated Japan continues to affect that entire nation, not least of all the fallout from the damage to the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Radioactivity has been leaking into the sea, and as Al Jazeera's Steve Chow reports, it's now feared the local fishing fleet and economy will be affected for decades to come.
The waters off Fukushima are some of the most fertile fishing grounds in all of Japan. And Captain Tadayoshi Tadokuro has fished them for 40 years. In all that time, he never imagined a catastrophe would not only take away his and his crew's livelihood, but would also turn the ocean into a threat. These days, when his men put down their lines, it's to collect samples for the government to test for radioactive cesium.
It's really hard for us. We used to fish throughout the year, and everyone enjoyed eating our fresh catch. Now there's no happiness left in our lives.
Nobody knows just how much radioactive material has spilled into the ocean, but here is a comparison. During the peak of the Chernobyl incident, 1,000 becquerels per cubic meter of water was detected. At the peak of Fukushima, it was 100,000 becquerels. It was first thought currents would swiftly dilute the radiation. At this testing lab in Fukushima, results from the samples of fish are proving otherwise. Some are registering cesium levels of up to 15,000 becquerels, 30 times the government limit. And scientists say fish species and other marine life that spend their time closer to the ocean floor are showing even higher concentrated levels, suggesting contamination is seeping into the seabed.
Because the contamination is staying on the sea floor, the situation is going to continue for a long time. Unless it is removed, it will climb up the food chain.
The big worry is how it will impact fish at the top of the chain. Tuna is a multi-billion-dollar industry and the most prized in Japan. Because fishermen are traveling 900 kilometers out to catch the far-roaming species, it's legal to fish for now. But even tuna is starting to show traces of cesium.
We're anxious. We don't know how much cesium we will see. We don't think the government knows what to do.
Unlike contamination on land, officials say they have no answer as to how to rid the vast ocean of the radioactive fallout. That leaves coastal fishermen fearing it could be decades before they're allowed to return. By then, they say, their way of life will have long disappeared. Steve Chow, Al Jazeera, Fukushima, Japan.
Always in the news, Afghanistan and its neighbours on Wednesday pledged to better their counter-narcotics efforts to stabilise the region. The regional program was launched just days after the international community met in Bonn to decide on future support for Afghanistan after foreign troops leave in 2014. The UN is expected to take on more responsibilities in supporting Afghanistan as the troops gradually begin to withdraw, but it will be a big job. Over the past 5 years, the country has produced some 90% of the world's illicit opium. UN specialist Yuri Fedotov spoke to Ann Thomas about the drug problem in Afghanistan.
Afghanistan continues to represent a clear threat in terms of drugs, and every year 100,000 people dies from opium consumed and produced in Afghanistan. And that is also a serious threat to the stability in the region and to Afghanistan itself. Afghanistan has the highest rates of drug addiction in the world. So it continues to be a serious challenge, including the production of opium in Afghanistan continues to grow. And so the situation requires urgent measures. And we need to move for a change and to consolidate a strategy how to tackle this issue.
Today, UNODC is launching a new regional program involving the countries, not just Afghanistan, but the countries in Central Asia. How do you think that is going to help, and what impact do you hope that will have?
I hope that the regional program, which is actually a sort of a strategic framework for what we are doing in this region and for what we plan to do, could help engage all countries in the region in more meaningful and close cooperation along the line of the concept of the shared responsibility. We hope that the launch of this program would help us to deliver more and also will help us to maximize the support from the international community to the efforts by the United Nations and its partners in the region.
After the international forces leave by 2014, how do you think UNODC's role may change after that?
Well, it's not only about UNODC role, but also about UN role at large. And it is clear that after the withdrawal of international forces from Afghanistan, the responsibility of the United Nations in supporting the government of Afghanistan will increase. So we need to be well prepared and to face this new reality. So we need to start taking measures well in advance to be well prepared to handle this situation.
Now, we've just seen a double bomb blast in Afghanistan on Tuesday with around 60 people killed. How is the security situation there on the ground impacting on the work that UNODC is doing there?
This security situation, of course, has a serious impact on what we are doing. That's why UN and UNODC in particular always insist that the security of staff, which quite often is a soft target for terrorists, must be ensured and observed. And quite recently we took additional measures to strengthen the security measures of our office in Kabul.
Yuri Fedotov speaking to Ann Thomas about the drug cultivation problem in Afghanistan. And finally to Libya, as the National Transitional Council works to move the country towards a new future. And a torch-lighting ceremony in Tripoli has attempted to depict the population's commitment to unity in the country. This report by John Adams in the Libyan capital begins with revolutionary fighter Al-Fattori Nabil describing the symbolism behind the torch procession.
The spark of the revolution started in the east from Benghazi city, in the west of Libya from the mountains, and in the center of Tripoli. A torch arriving from the east and one from the west will meet in the middle of Tripoli to represent victory and freedom.
This ceremony in Tripoli's Martyrs Square brought thousands of Libyans onto the streets of the capital. They were there to remember all the people involved in the revolution, including the various international forces under NATO and those who lost their lives fighting for freedom. Ali Malid from the western Nafusa mountain range has been honoured with carrying one of the torches.
Certainly, it's a great feeling of joy that I'm carrying this torch, which represents Libya's honor for the 17th of February revolution.
This event has come at a time when the National Transitional Council is working to develop a new Libya still reeling from the recent revolution. The biggest problem being faced is the lack of authority over weapons on the streets, with security still in the hands of militias and former rebels, and no national police or army yet ready to take their place. Already armed groups have engaged in deadly skirmishes with each other. In the face of these difficulties, bringing the police and rebels together to light the main torch was extremely symbolic.
There is no difference between us. We have the same religion, the same country. There is no difference between us, East and West. We are all one. These people who hosted this event wanted to show the world that we are united, even in times of trouble. It's just a matter of time until the wise members of the NTC, who we stand by, will solve these simple problems.
Yes, certainly a long journey ahead. John Adams reporting there from Libya. And that is The World for this week. If you want to learn more about the program or wish to make a contribution to the show, then please visit us at www.theworldradioshow.com. The World is committed to bringing you stories that affect the people of our planet, either on a mass or individual scale, and we hope to do so with balance and integrity. As always, we welcome your comments and your suggestions, so please do keep in touch at www.theworldradioshow.com. The program is produced and compiled by Tim Stackpool, and I look forward to your